It's hard to define what exactly makes a good game. Is it the story, the gameplay, the music, or does it have to include some or all of the above? Every year, new games release, promising better, bigger, and badder titles. And that's right, we just invented the term triple B games. But how often do you truly remember these good games? How often do you finish them? And more importantly, what separates a good game from a truly great game? Every year, websites all over the world judge that year's Game of the Year. And every year, people have wildly different takes on what the best game of the year was. But what if we went higher than that? What about a game of the decade? And what if, for a moment, we set our standards so high that only the most memorable game, singular, was good enough? These games don't come by too often, but there are certainly a number of titles I could think of as nominees for such an award. And yet, there is only one which would be truly deserving of it. And that game, without question, without hesitation, would for me have to be developer CD Projekt Red's The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I've been thinking about this one for some time, years even, and since this is the 6th anniversary of the game, I thought I would finally make a video dedicated to perhaps my favorite game of all time. There will inevitably be spoilers for most things in this video, so do be aware of that. This video will focus on what I love about the game, going through it thematically first rather than linearly, even though these aspects sometimes coalesce. So, without any further ado, welcome my friends, welcome to a love letter to The Witcher 3. It goes without saying that The Witcher 3 is a massive, all-encompassing game. There's so much here, so much beauty, so much horror, and so much in between, that its vastness is almost overwhelming. It's a game about kings and emperors, about refugees and corrupt soldiers, about minstrels and monsters, swamps and castles, cities and mountains, a wild hunt, hearts of gold and hearts of stone, fields of blood and fields of wine. So let's begin small. Let's begin at the smallest of small. The rings on the chainmail worn by Geralt, our main character. It's always astonished me how much detail is put into the steel and leather in Geralt's armor. We can see every shiny chain in the mail, every crack and memory of a slashed sword in the armor plates, and whether in the morning sun on top of a hill or a rainy fjord, this never changes. They convey a story in themselves, one which is never told in words, but still, a story of something that has been made, something which is integral to this world, and something which is definitely crafted, worn, and used. The chainmail is perhaps a very small part of The Witcher 3, but it symbolizes something so much bigger than itself. It is a testament to the attention to detail and to the extent to which the developers have gone to craft a truly realistic world. And we can talk about this word, realistic, or the classic and very much cliché terms of a living and breathing world. But these are clichés for a reason. And if we define a realistic world as one not necessarily where people act like real people, or where you can do whatever you want wherever you want, but one where trees sway in the wind, where the terrain is affected by the goings-on around it, and where the story, despite being fantastical, deals with real issues and where the main characters have believable emotions, motivations, hopes and dreams, then I truly venture forth and claim that The Witcher 3 offers one of the more realistic video game worlds I have ever played. But let's move away from the chainmail. Let's move to what's beneath it. Geralt of Rivia. The first time we meet the Witcher in this game, the first time we really meet him, is at dawn, on the top of a hill by a small fireplace. He has just awoken from a nightmare. For all his armor, his stature and his undeniably masculine look, Geralt is right from the beginning portrayed as a vulnerable man. He fears for the life of his adopted daughter Ciri, and for the well-being of the woman so close to his heart, Yennefer of Vengerberg. The depth to which Geralt's character is made has always amazed me. Other games too, or other media in general, often manage to create likable or even relatable characters. People who are funny, humble, who struggle, and some who even overcome. Some are old, some are outcasts, some are young, and others still face hardships and challenges of their own. Those are all great templates for relatable people. But Geralt is different. Geralt, like a human being, is multidimensional. Sure, Geralt is strong, powerful, and even scary in his brutality when he has to be. He has no qualms with fighting or killing those who threaten or stand in his way, a choice you as a player sometimes even get to make for him. But Geralt is also vulnerable, soft-spoken and worried. He's funny.
Grasp it firmly, move it around, and the louder it squeals, the closer you are. Spare me your juvenile wit, please.
Kind, charming, and playful, and goddamn if he isn't a man's man. I think we can all appreciate the absolute hunkadunk level of awesome this scene alone conveys. What makes Geralt not only great, but more importantly, believable, is exactly his multifaceted character. This aspect of The Witcher 3, the depth of the main protagonist himself, is something which almost completely removes the complaint many people have with video game protagonists, namely that the difference between what the player does and what the character stands for are so vastly different that we experience a phenomenon known as ludonarrative dissonance. This phenomenon is perhaps most easily explained by a quick look at the Uncharted or the Tomb Raider series, where the main characters are generally kind and likable people who wish very little harm upon others in cutscenes, all the while you are rampaging on a mass murder campaign in the actual game itself. Now this is not really the case with Geralt at all, for Geralt is a witcher, a bounty hunter who's standing on a knife's edge between poverty and wealth, who kills monsters for a living, but who also has to slash his way through corrupt people on the way as well. Specifically because this way of life is already built into Geralt's character, we very rarely or never experience ludonarrative dissonance. It never strikes us as weird or out of character when Geralt kills, because it's what he's trained to do. He's not some archaeologist's sheltered daughter or a random treasure grave robber who suddenly is able to come out on top versus hundreds of crazed goons. He's a trained killer himself, even one who's undergone mutations which are said to have stripped him of normal human emotions. In my mind, this makes Geralt something of a perfect video game character. He's not the only one, but he's perhaps the best example of one, where so many aspects of humanity comes together in a close to fully realized whole. What astonishes me about Geralt is the way his personality changes depending on who he's spending time with. Alongside his teacher Vesemir, an old man he's known since childhood, Geralt is respectful, but is confident enough to be himself around him.
What's this postscript? I still have the unicorn?
Stuffed unicorn. Used it once or twice. In certain situations.
The things young folk get up to these days.
Back on topic.
With the sorceress Yennefer, Geralt is both relatively timid, yet playful, clearly emblematic of the long history of their relationship.
A great deal has changed.
You haven't. Not a bit.
I missed those awkward compliments of yours.
With Ciri, Geralt is responsible and worried, like a father would be.
Though in your shoes I'd fear Vesemir more than any Striga. Disobeying his instructions? Unwise.
Well, yes, but that book was horribly dull.
I know, and you know that's no excuse.
I'm sorry. It won't happen again.
Better not. Vesemir said if it does, he'll make you eat a bowl of slugs covered in salt.
You!
Exactly. So you'd best behave.
And with his friends Dandelion and Sultan, Geralt cracks jokes, is lighthearted and funny.
Fog's thick as curdled milk.
Never took you for a poet.
Oh, but I am one. Want to hear a limerick?
Sure,
Lambert, what a prig.
not bad.
His relationships go a long way in humanizing him, as many of us can relate to one or of several of his relationships and how he acts differently in the presence of friends, mentors, loved ones, or complete strangers. But it's not only in meeting with our named characters that Geralt's many sides are revealed to us. The Witcher is a monster slayer, this is true, but he never kills indiscriminately, and if he can deal with a monster in a non-violent way, he will.
Salma, a succubus in Novigrad. Let her go free, even though I knew she'd killed some guardsmen.
You mean, even when you know a monster's killed someone, you don't hurt them?
If it had good reason. Yeah, sometimes.
Despite his warrior-like exterior, he deals with civilians in a mostly kind and understanding way, is rarely short or angry unless they have given him real cause, And even though I often embark on quests, called contracts in this game, that he's either forced to complete or is not too enthusiastic about, he always sees them through to the end, being mindful of the people involved in whatever mystery he's solving. I suppose you could say he's a sort of warrior Poirot, and his character really shines through his thick armor and even past the tip of a sword in these smaller contracts that you'll be completing all over the world. This is exactly why I've cried with Geralt, why I've laughed with him, why I've felt disgust alongside him, why I've felt genuine happiness for him, and why I love him. I care for Geralt, and I think anyone who spent hundreds of hours riding alongside him will know what I'm talking about. Because nothing's ever really what it seems with Geralt, in that if you simply pass by the game, seeing only the combat or an unlucky cutscene, I wouldn't be surprised if he was mistaken for any other violent or angry male video game character. But standing apart from these, The Witcher is so much more than what first meets the eye. The way we're introduced to other characters in Geralt's life is important not only for how we come to view them, but it's also so perfectly done in a way that managed to drive the story forward, and each new interaction heralds a change in the game's overall vibe and location. In the beginning, Geralt's mentor and teacher Vesemir is our main companion. Vesemir is older, a bit more cynical towards the world, but still strong and wise. There's some poetic beauty in the fact that we're riding alongside Vesemir at the start, because as with any game, the beginning is when you're eased into things, when you get to learn the game's mechanics and how most things work. To be in the presence of a teacher is therefore probably no accident, and Vesemir acts as a rather calming presence in a world which, even at this stage, feels vast and sometimes hostile. I say even at this stage, because in the opening, we find ourselves in a tiny, tiny corner of the world, a small village and its outskirts known as White Orchard. Now, White Orchard is a microcosm of the world outside. It boasts a village, fields, a river, ruined castles, signs of bloody struggles, monsters, forests, and signs of what's to come. A political conflict between old powers and new, between the Empire of Nilfgaard and the Kingdom of Redania. The rise of the former soon intersects with Geralt's goal of finding his adoptive daughter Ciri, who's gone missing when Emperor Ymir summons him to his court. He too wishes to find Ciri, as in reality, Ciri is the actual daughter of the Emperor and the heir to his throne. This is also when we meet Yennefer, who's already been hired for the same purpose because of her magical powers. At this stage, we only get a very short glimpse of what the relationship between Geralt and Yennefer is like, until they have to part ways again. There's barely even time for a kiss, no discussions, no clearings up of past grievances, and after leaving Emperor Ymir's court, Geralt, and by extension you, are finally truly alone in the world. So unforgiving is this universe that you're at this point cast into the arguably worst part of the world, the land of Velen, a war-torn, backward and monster-ridden place in more than one sense of the word. Here, you'll come up against the unmasked brutality of humanity in an age where it's often kill or be killed, where despicable monsters are just as dangerous as your fellow humans, and where a bloody baron, ridden with grief and regret, asks your help in return for information or where Ciri has gone. You might have noticed that we haven't even touched upon the reason for the game's title yet, The Wild Hunt. And there's a reason for this. For even though it is true that there's always an overarching tale to the story, that the world is threatened by the invasion of the Wild Hunt, which threatens to enslave and eradicate humanity, this story is arguably not the most important one. For you see, The Witcher 3 cares a whole lot for each individual story. From the largest to the smallest, and perhaps more often than not, the opposite is true, meaning from the smallest to the largest. Because at this point in the game, nothing is more important than to help a drunken baron find his lost wife and child. It may sound trivial, akin to an ordinary fetch quest of go there, find this and come back. But nothing could be further from the truth. This quest, ingeniously named Family Matters due to the word matter's double meaning, takes you all over Velen. From its population center at Krau's Perch, to abandoned villages, haunted towers, forgotten caves, and cursed bogs. Family Matters teaches us from the get-go that nothing is simple in this world, that everything has a backstory and that every choice is a double-edged sword, that the choices you make rarely only has one outcome. Family Matters deal with heavy topics: alcoholism, domestic abuse, miscarriage, abduction, mental health, and abandonment. But more than that, it perfectly merges the realistic, what we've just described, with the fantastical and the nightmarish. Because between all this stands a group of 3 witches, the Crones, the Ladies of the Wood, whose powers reign supreme in all the forests and caves and bogs of Velen. Our stories cross those of the Barons and the Ladies when we find that it is they who have abducted the Baron's wife Anna, who by now has turned into a shadow of her old self. There is no happiness to be found here. No good ending, no true peace of mind for anyone but the wicked. For even though we liberate Anna from the sisters in the end, she is no longer herself. And the tragedy of family matters is that some choices simply cannot be undone. That for all we wish and hope, some outcomes are set in stone and fully unknown until we actually get to the end. Playing in Velen might seem like an eternity for some. And true enough, you'll probably have played between 10 and 20 hours before you're finally ready to say goodbye to the Baron and head north, far away from the dark forests and swamps of the south. North into Novigrad, a haven of sun and golden fields in comparison. It's lighter, more pleasant in the north, across the Yaruga, the great river that divides Novigrad from Velen. Reaching the border crossing between Velen and Novigrad was an awakening for me. A line of refugees wait, perhaps in vain, to be able to cross the bridge, while we ride along carrying a sealed document of passage, allowing us to venture forth. Or, if you haven't been that lucky yet, you could always purchase one from a scalper for a hefty price. Even here, or perhaps especially here, we confront another instance of the brutality of this world. But we make it across, and instead of rainy swamps and cursed forests, we enter a much more peaceful land. It's a massive change of scenery, one accompanied by a gentle change in music, elevating the entire experience from being just a visual one. As such, both the visual and the audio come together perfectly in Novigrad, as they do in so many other instances of this game. Novigrad itself is a massive city, unlike any other in this game or in the entire genre of gaming for that matter. Outside its towering walls lie a collection of farms and small villages, but the walls themselves are definitely a stunning main attraction here, looking more genuine than perhaps any other video game city of its kind. Novigrad itself consists of different city districts, and what's astonishing is that just for this one city, there have been composed a musical track for each district. You can clearly tell when you're walking through the main city, when you've entered the poor quarter, and when you've made it into the wealthy upper parts. It gets me every time how much attention to detail there is here, and you really get the sense that this could have been a real place, as it has a mix of Western and Eastern European architecture littered across its district. Novigrad is where we're introduced to many important characters in Geralt's life, the next one being Triss Marigold. Triss, like Yennefer, is a powerful sorceress who has a history with Geralt. In the second game, the two of them shared a romance, a bit of an awkward situation seeing as Geralt was suffering from amnesia at the time, but was technically still in some kind of a romantic relationship with Yennefer. But at this stage, Triss is being hunted by the ruling government of Novigrad, so-called witch hunters, following the teachings of the Church of the Eternal Fire, who despise magic and witches most of all. Triss is vulnerable and in need of our help, but despite her obstacles, she remains brave and strong, sacrificing her well-being for Geralt's quest of finding Ciri. It's immediately clear that the two of them have fond memories together, but that these are complicated by the circumstances in which they were made. The whole thing is, like most things in The Witcher 3, rather tragic. Of course, since this is a role-playing game where your choices matter, you will in fact be able to choose, to use a gamer term here, to romance Triss later in the game. In other words, choosing to initiate a relationship with her. But for now, these things are left up to the future. Soon after, however, Novigrad offers us my favorite quest in the entire game. And it's perhaps not an obvious one. If you play The Witcher 3, maybe you've even forgotten about it. I'm talking about a quest called Broken Flowers. A quest so zen and vibes that it's to die from. The quest begins like this. You're told by this witch to go seek out Dandelion, an old friend of Geralt who's a bit of an eccentric figure. Dandelion is a bard, a fairly cocky one at that, and has recently acquired his very own tavern, the Rosemary and Thyme. We make our way there, only to find the tavern abandoned if it weren't for some bandits and another unlikely figure, Zoltan, another one of Geralt's old friends. Zoltan is also trying to find Dandelion, but has no idea where he is. However, Zoltan does know that Dandelion has been meeting with several different women lately, and thus starts our lovely, lovely quest. You see, Broken Flowers is essentially a showcase for the entirety of Novigrad. We make our way from one district to the next, talking to 5 women, most of whom have been smitten with Dandelion, and who come from completely different backgrounds. Outside the city, we get to talk to the washerwoman, Vespula, who at first is upset at Dandelion for having seen him with another woman, but who quickly warms up to the idea of seeing him again.
What do you think? Where could Dandelion be?
Probably out whoring. That horse pheasant. That lying scoundrel.
Listen, when I find Dandelion, anything I should tell him?
No. I mean, tell him he's a two-faced snake, but it would be nice if he dropped by.
After that, we go to see the elf Elial, a surprisingly colorful and unique character in this world, who reports on having had a wonderful conversation with Dandelion not long ago. Then we enter the poor district, where the teacher Marabella is busy educating the city's children, before we move up to the embassy district to see the maid Molly. Because Molly is away watching horse races, we get to join an old acquaintance to said race, at the beautiful Vegelbund estate outside the city, and even partake in the horse race itself. Lastly, we venture back to the embassy district to a pair of noblemen's daughters in need of fencing lessons. Although giving us little information on Dandelion's whereabouts, we get some interesting observations on the political scene, as well as a bit of an insight into the sheltered life of said sisters. The women speak of a 6th woman, however, whom we eventually go and seek out next. Her name is Priscilla, a singing poet, and we're treated to a beautiful sonnet the moment we see her.
Youthfully, my dream come the morning, your scent, berries tart, lilac sweet, to dream of raven locks and twisted stormy, of violet eyes glistening as you weep.
And this completes my favorite Witcher 3 quest. Broken Flowers is a beautiful little story in and of itself, of short-lived relationships and a city so full of life and people from vastly different backgrounds, and when sat opposed to the dark and grim world of Velen we just left, I always have a great time doing it. It stands out to me because it's so devoid of combat, even though there are some fighting instances, but relies more fully on conversation, on exploring Novigrad and simply taking in these experiences of being in a completely new place. Hopefully I've expressed to you how much this quest means to me by now. If we continue through the main story and skip a whole bunch of parts, we reach our new grand destination, Skellig, a series of grass and snow-covered islands hugely reminiscent of my own country, Norway, but which you could probably recognize both in Scotland and Iceland as well. It is fun to see though that some of the village names on Skellig are Lofoten and Larvik, actual names of Norwegian cities. But apart from the trivia, Skellig is a breathtakingly beautiful place. From the capital at Kertjolde, to the fields below the towering mountains, to the fjords and all the little islands, many of them with, again, their completely own soundtrack. It's absolutely stunning what CDPR managed to create. This is also the place where we finally meet Yennefer again, and in no boring terms either. We arrive at Skellig in a rather mellow moment. The last High King has just passed away, and the people of Kertjolde are attending the funeral to pay their respects. It is here that Geralt sees Yennefer for the first time and was probably taking us around 30 to 40 hours, and his opening line is nothing short but legendary.
You smell wonderful.
Geralt, we're at a funeral.
You smell wonderful at this funeral.
It is here at Skellig where we finally get to know Geralt and Yennefer, and experience what their relationship is really like. Yennefer is, much like Triss, a powerful sorceress who has a history with the Witcher. But unlike Triss, Yennefer is determined, certain of herself almost to a fault.
Mind if I take the helm?
I got a choice.
No.
And clearly holds a power over Geralt no one else does.
You could stand to be nicer sometimes.
I suppose. But then I wouldn't be the woman you fell in love with, would I?
In short, Yennefer is boss, but underneath her thick layer of confidence lies a person who is unsure of whether Geralt truly loves her. And this relationship is something we get to explore and mold as well, completely dependent on which of the women, if any, in Geralt's life that you're more fond of. Just, please, don't try to romance both of them, okay? You'll regret it, I promise.
God damn it, you piece of shit!
Uh-oh.
Damned crystal!
You decide to blow us up?
Geralt, I'm in no mood for jests, especially dull ones.
And again, if you haven't played much, then we're getting into heavy spoiler territory here, so you have been warned. Although much later, Skellig is also the place where we eventually find Ciri. Now the first time I played The Witcher 3, it took me about 70 hours of gameplay before I reached the Isle of Mist quest, where we finally meet her. I had seemingly been everywhere with Geralt. He had been through thick and thin, in forests, cities and villages, helping people in need and being in the presence of kings and emperors, all in the hopes of seeing his daughter again. And when we do, this is what meets us. Not fanfare or sunlight, but we find ourselves on a dark, misty island. I'm completely struck by Geralt's facial expressions and his body language, and this entire scene is probably the most emotional and powerful one in the entire game. To go so long, to search and find only more leads and slivers of hope, only to see a lifeless body, the idea sends shivers down my spine even now. But as luck would have it, fortune is on our side, and Ciri reveals herself to be alive after only a few moments later. I can say I was almost as relieved as Geralt to be able to sit around the fire with her and have a good conversation, and realize that the long search was finally over. And Ciri, who we've seen only so far through flashbacks and stories told by others, ends up being one of the game's best characters. As with the other women in the game, she is strong, brave and wise, and turns out to be the key in defeating the evil which after all threatens the world as we know it, the Wild Hunt.
So why'd you return?
I thought the hunt had lost my scent for good. I thought I was safe. Besides, I wanted to find you. You and Yennefer.
You were looking for us, we were looking for you. Times I thought you were just a step away. Other times, felt like I was going around in circles.
It is to the home of the Witchers that we go from here, Kaer Morhen. A grand but dusty fortress, it is now only inhabited by a few Witchers, but becomes in The Witcher 3 a gathering point for the characters coming together in the hopes of stopping the Wild Hunt. Depending on your actions, you'll have more than a handful of people here, and it becomes a sort of home for us, for the player as well. This fortress is where we truly meet the full force of the Wild Hunt for the first time, in the quest to battle for Kaer Morhen. For the Wild Hunt, as should be known by now if you played the game, hunts for Ciri and the magical powers inherent in her elder blood. It is here that we truly get to reunite with old Witcher friends and experience the awesome power wielded by our sorceresses. When I originally played the game, it is here that I first felt that I had experienced something truly epic in this main story. What I mean by this is that The Witcher 3 has this overarching story which concerns the Wild Hunt, but it also offers a ton of subplots, many of which we have discussed here already, and lastly, an untold number of smaller questlines. To me, it is in the subplots that the main meat of The Witcher 3 lies, and as time has gone by, the interactions between the game's characters and the stories littered around the world has become increasingly important. The main story in The Witcher 3 as it relates to the evil which threatens the world isn't particularly fancy or groundbreaking, but everything around it is told so well, to a point where the main plot honestly becomes more of a backdrop to everything else. It's a tough balance to make, and I suppose I would have liked to see an even better story related to the Wild Hunt than the one we got, but as things stand, this is barely even worth a complaint. When I arrived at the Battle of Kaer Morhen, I was ready to soon see the end screen, and I was dreading it so much that I considered putting off playing the game more. I could not have been more wrong, however, as this point barely marks the 70% finish point, with another probably 10 or 15 hours of the main story left. What amazes me about The Witcher 3 is its attention to proper pacing. Like when we could finally take a breather after leaving Velen and riding into Novigrad, the aftermath of the intense Battle of Kaer Morhen is solemn, calm, but uplifting. Our group has experienced something traumatic, Ciri most of all, and again we see Geralt's character shining through.
There's a certain ancient method. Vesemir taught it to me, and Barman taught it to him.
Will you take me into the mountains and make me drink hemlock?
The Skellige druids have used it for centuries. It always works.
Hey! You'll regret that.
Out of nowhere, he initiates the best little snowball fight in gaming history and displays at the same time how much he loves and worries for Ciri. The absolute best part of the main storyline then is to me not the main events, not the tale of the wild hunt or the great calamities to come. Instead, what lives on forever is how it perfectly guides us from one place to another, from one person to another, and allows us to see and experience this beautifully crafted world and the people in the best possible way. So far in this love letter, we haven't even touched upon many of the gameplay mechanics, what it's actually like to play the game. And I won't focus too much on this even now, as the gameplay is honestly perfect for my liking. I love how Geralt walks, I love how he rides, I enjoy the use of his Witcher senses to seek out hidden objects, and yes, I even love the combat. Now the combat is perhaps the aspect of The Witcher 3 which has gotten the most flack. Honestly, I don't know why. I suppose people feel it is repetitive or too easy somehow. I personally play on the hardest difficulty after the first playthrough, and I can admit that once you get the hang of things, it could have been more complicated. But that's also why I love it. Geralt fights almost like a Jedi. He swings and dances and pirouettes, elegantly dealing with humans or monsters, whichever befits the situation. I love the fact that we have quick and slow attacks, that he has magic powers known as signs, which are more or less effective depending on the situation, and that if you really want an edge, it's always wise to use concoctions and potions before battling an extra dangerous enemy, although this aspect was perhaps more extreme and necessary in the second game. All in all, the gameplay itself is great, and I have very few complaints about it. Even the crafting system works perfectly fine, where you need to collect certain materials to craft new and better swords or weapons, whose pieces can only be found at certain remote locations in the world in a sort of special treasure hunt. On my part, I absolutely love it, and there's little more I have to say about that. Something I will say more about though, is the best minigame ever made. A very special, not so little card game called Gwent.
Up for a few rounds of Gwent?
Gwent is the go-to pastime for this world's inhabitants. It pits the game's different factions up against one another in a relatively harmless way, but is so insanely addictive. Gwent is a game where you play to win by ending each round with the highest score, and you reach the highest score by having the most amount or the highest scoring cards on the board at the same time. And there's a whole lot of tactics that go into this. I think Gwent is so amazing because it's fairly simple to learn, even though it takes a while to become really good at it, and because you collect and purchase cards as you travel on your journey. In addition, each Gwent faction has their own unique playstyle, so both knowing your own and the opponent's strengths and weaknesses are important. It took me a while to get into Gwent at first, as I saw it as nothing more than a hassle to learn, but when I finally decided to learn it on my second playthrough, well, I saw the light. And that's everything I think I should say about Gwent before we get too bogged down into this wonderful card game within a game. What we do have to talk about, however, is the game's incredible expansion packs. The first one of these is the Hearts of Stone expansion, where we mostly spend time revisiting the outskirts of Novigrad and the city of Oxenfurt, while meeting some wonderful new characters and get to meet some old ones. Despite actually being the smaller of the two expansions, it's a wonderful added story. It's dark and mysterious, driven by the interplay between Gaunter O'Dim, a devil-like genie who makes us agree to a blood pact, and Olgierd von Everec, a former nobleman turned bandit who suffers from a lost love, but more importantly, the curse of immortality. As mentioned, Hearts of Stone is dark and grim, but offers perhaps the most lighthearted and fun single quest in the entire game, where you're forced to show the long-dead brother of Olgierd a so-called good time. I won't go too much into it, but Olgierd's brother, Vladimir, is brought back to life as a ghost who's able to possess Geralt's body, and he knows how to use it.
Faster, faster till we expire.
The two of them quickly find themselves at a party full of games and dancing, and even though it might not be all Geralt doing the footwork, I can say I felt genuinely happy seeing him smile and laugh, as if all worries of the world around him had evaporated. And this is the genius of Hearts of Stone. It's a relatively small package which still manages to cram a solid game into itself, and one which also shows every aspect of the world of The Witcher in no less than a few dozen hours. All its cruelty, tragedy, happiness and promise. Now the final expansion for this marvel of a game, Blood and Wine, is a different beast entirely. And honestly, it's hard to express how amazing this one is. Perhaps not as intense as Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine makes up for this by offering a full game worth of astonishing content in itself, and an entirely new area completely different from what we have experienced so far. A duchy to the south, Toussaint and the city of Beauclair are stunning creations of something reminiscent of southern French wine country. Here are castles, rivers, green fields, marvelous city streets, and yes, vineyards. But what's more, and of course there was more, is what lurks beneath it all, beneath the sun and the beauty. As the title suggests, Toussaint is not only known for its wine, but also for its blood-starved creatures, and in this case, it's the good old classic vampire we have to deal with. Luckily, the vampires are just as multifaceted as they are violent, with some of them admittedly more thoughtful and reflective than others. But Blood and Wine is so much more. It's taking part in nightly tourneys, exploring the vast beauty of the landscape, completing more Witcher contracts, and, as a series first, getting into the possession of your very own manor, which, yes, you'll get to renovate all on your own. It's a massive expansion which I personally could not be happier with, and it perfectly completes one of the most comprehensive experiences of all time at its most beautiful. In this love letter, I've tried to convey to you how much I love The Witcher 3, how deep and believable I find the characters, how much I adore and appreciate the music, and how the world pulls them all together into a magnificent whole. I've tried to put no lid on my love for this game, instead focusing on everything that is done so well and clearly made with an infinite amount of care and love, in order to produce an experience which translates to me ending up feeling this way. This is not some fancy critique or an ultimate analysis, but exactly what I called it. A love letter. Because I love this game. A game like The Witcher 3 only comes about once every 10 years, and that's if we're lucky. And if you haven't played it yet, well then, go do it. I'm serious. It's long and might seem like something you don't have time for, or something you won't understand at first, but I assure you, it's worth it. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is an artistic masterpiece in every sense of the word, one I cannot wait to one day see toppled by another title. But that day is likely to be far away, if it ever comes at all. Friends, thank you so much for watching. I've been wanting to let my feelings for this game be known for a while, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me and to go through this game alongside me. This video took a long time to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you'll help me out by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you'd consider supporting me on Patreon. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
We have witnessed, and in fact on several occasions incited, many great and weighty events. After all that toil, I believe we deserve a bit of a rest.
That we do.
Cheers.